And welcome, everybody. This is another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and joining me today, I've got three of my favorite Sculpty boys here around the table with me. Joining us all the way up from Canada is Spleenface. Spleen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Also joining us from the great state of Ohio is my good friend Cobblepott. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Good to be here.
Awesome. And, of course, from right here in Lincoln, Nebraska is my good friend Fenix. Fenix, how's it going today?
Going great. Keeping very busy.
You know, Cobble, I got to tell you, somebody who's from Ohio as well. It was a very interesting weekend for me from a sports perspective because, you know, the Browns had their first win in like 20 years in the playoff.
19 years since they've been in the plaffs. So
yeah. And then Ohio State just got demolished in the national championship game. So
it's karma.
You know, you know what? The Browns got to win. I'm not a Browns I'm not a Browns fan like my dad is, but you know, I still root for the home team. So, but yeah, it's been quite the weekend for Ohio sports. So, but you guys didn't come here for me to talk about how happy I am about that. You guys came here to hear us talk about competitive EDH. And before we jump into that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe to our videos. And also, if you want to go down to our Patreon, the link is in the description. We've got 4 different tiers for you. We've got different sort of rewards for those. We're going to start uploading videos to Patreon that are patron exclusives here probably starting in February. And as well, you don't care about that, you can just send us a little bit of money there. But also, if you want access to our Discord server, that is how you're going to get that access. So today we've got a show lined up for you. This is something that Cobble's been wanting to do for quite a while. We're calling this Brewer's Choice. And so basically what this is we are specifically our brewers this week, which are Morgan, Spleenface, Fenix, and Cobblepott. They're going to be given a commander pair or just a commander to start with. And you're able to take any approach you want and see where everybody kind of comes down to, where they overlap, where they agree, and what differences and we kind of all come up with. And just to kind of give you an idea of what goes into building a deck, where those thought processes are, and also to kind of give you some new spicy builds to try out on your own. So with that being said, since, Cobblepott really, this was your brainchild. This was something you were really into. So our commanders that we are given for this challenge is one of the new partners from the most recent Commander Legends set, Kodama of the East Tree. And that is going to be partnered with Vial Smasher the Fierce. So just kind of here at the top is kind of looking at the overall game plan. What are the differences? What is, Cobble, we'll start with you. What is it that your game plan is, kind of your high level game plan overall?
So Kadama plus Vial Smasher is going to put us into Jund, which means we're not going to have access to blue. So this is going to kind of push us into wanting to play a more aggressive game because we're not going to be able to play a really reactive game given we don't have a lot of the tools to do that. So Jund happens to be very good at being fast and being aggressive. It's got a lot of support for a number of different combos, and it's got a lot of support for kind of a stormish kind of a plan given that black and red have a lot of access to card draw and tutor support. So my particular list is taking kind of a Turbo Nas approach and is incorporating the immense value engine that Kadama is to kind of round out the types of games that you can have with the Turbo Nas strategy. So what I mean by that is that if you don't happen to open up with the the exact kind of opener that you want, where you're just firing on all cylinders and just have a very a quick win. Spending some mana to get Kadama onto the battlefield is going to go a long way into kind of bridging the gap between not having any gas and getting there. Kadama allows you to do a bunch of really, really cool things, but probably the most significant, or the one that is the most pronounced when you see Kadama come onto the table, is just his ramping capability. So we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in a minute, where we kind of come down to the important lines. But just for my particular list, it's Turbo Nas with some value on the side to fill in the gaps in case you get disrupted, or you don't have everything to start your plan from the start.
Right. Fenix, you also kind of went at it in an interesting way. What's very interesting, before I even kind of go to you, is I got a chance to look at all these lists before we went on the air, and you all three have very unique and different lists. It's very, very interesting to look at, because they have overlap, but these are all very different. So I'm very excited to see this. So Fenix, for your game plan and your kind of overall what you're looking to do, what is your list doing?
Yeah, so just to speak to some of the similarities that all the lists have, we're definitely all playing Nas, and we're definitely all playing Underworld Breach. But the amount that we're leveraging specifically Nas, Underworld Breach, or maybe some Kodama specific combos are different between the three decks. And so mine lands somewhere a little bit farther away from Turbo Nas and a little bit closer to somewhere like a farm, where it is trying to leverage Underworld Breach to attempt a combo and be really resilient. And so you see that with some of the differences in my deck, where I'm not playing quite as many spell-based ramp pieces and a few more actually permanent-based ramp pieces.
Yeah.
And then just speaking to the color combination, we really all landed somewhere on the either including Praetor's Grasp or Opposition Agent, something to leverage some opponent's cards and kind of the weaknesses of just Jund itself.
Yeah. One of the things about your deck list that I really like, and we'll get into this more when we talk about certain card selection, but I love the fact that you have Keen Sense in this list. It really makes me think of what is it, 4-color Ashme, really, when you got that on there with the Vial Smasher list. So it's very interesting seeing that in a non-blue deck. But you'll have your chance to explain that here in a little bit. But going over to Spleenface, you took, I would say, probably the most unique path from everybody.
I think so. I think I have the most unique cards out of anyone.
Yeah.
You do.
So everybody has their overlap. Cobblepott doing some of the more shadow bag farm sort of stuff. Fenix going all in on farm, and you are playing Conspicuous Snoop. So kind of explain where you're at with that.
Yeah, so I was sort of thinking about how the Snoop combos work, and like how the mana can be somewhat awkward. But Kodama actually does like a decent amount of legwork in sort of fixing that. Like you can cast the Recruiter, and then either just put the Snoop into play if you have it, or if you have instant speed card draw, and there's some cards that I included specifically to enable that, you can pile it so that you get if you cast your Recruiter, you put your pile on top, the first card is Snoop, and then you draw it at instant speed with one of the few effects that lets you do that. Then you can put it into play for free off the Kodama trigger for Recruiter, and then that makes your whole combo line a lot cheaper. You don't have to pay the double red for Snoop, and then also particularly the Kiki, and then playing just a random sort of Kiki bottom works very well with Kodama as well, because you effectively only have to cast one of them. And yeah, so I wanted to play sort of a more permanent based strategy, which is also why like Snoop was kind of an excuse to play cards like Priest of Gix, which is it's a 3-mana 2/1 that when it enters you add 3 red mana, which is obviously hilarious with Kodama because it's essentially you cast it, you get 3 mana back, and you put a 3-drop into play, or up to a 3-drop into play from your hand, which just lets you have some pretty crazy turns. And so, Snoop needing the red, and then I was like, oh, well, I can play this. So yeah, I decided to leverage that. And I also played Razaketh because it actually layers surprisingly well with Snoop. And then the reanimate cards, specifically the enchantments, also have a lot of synergy with Kodama, where you cast them, they enter, you put something out for free, you reanimate the creature, you put something else out for free, etc.
God, Kodama is just really good.
Responding to the Kodama trigger on Razaketh by sacrificing something and going and finding, say, like, Priest of Gix, and then putting it out for free, and then sacrificing it to Razaketh and getting the free mana. Oh, baby.
That's
good stuff.
That is sexy. So we kind of looked at those top end, what is the overall game plan? What are we wanting to do here? But Morgan kind of got into this a little bit there. But we're doing some combos here, and there are going to be some important lines to get there. So, Cobble, when we're looking at your combos, and one of the, and I don't think this is in our show notes, but this is something that I kind of want to touch on because it is something that is a little bit more obscure and not everybody might know specifically how this works, is the Shadow of the Grave and the Bag of Holding lines that are within this list. And so what is that doing? How does that work? And just kind of explain to some of our listeners who might not be familiar with that.
Right. So Shadow Bag was kind of a module that I kind of put together for some lists back, actually, when Flash Hulk was still legal. And the idea was that it was a handful of cards that you used with Bone Miser. That if you've ever heard of Bone Miser, it winds up being very similar to Gitrog. So it's a 3 black creature that
It's 4
I'm sorry,
colorless
no,
and
yeah,
black,
four and a black. That's right.
Yeah.
But it's a creature that is effectively an inverse waste not. So whenever you discard a card, if it's a land, you get black. If it's a creature, you get a zombie token, and if it's anything else, then you draw a card. And the idea is that you can, with either a discard outlet like Putrid Imp or Oblivion Crown, or using something like LED, or just your end of turn kind of sculpting, you can select if you've got a big enough hand. If you've got any sort of value engine that you have going that's drawing you cards, or if you've got a Naz or a Necro or a Pier or a Valkit, well, not the Valkit Exploration because those are being exiled, but if you've gotten yourself into a hand that's bigger than 7, then you can do an end turn sculpt and choose which cards you want to discard. And just like with Gitrog, when you discard some number of cards down to 7, if any of the cards that you discarded allow you to draw more cards, then you're going to have more cards than 7 again, and it's going to put you in a state where the game sees that you, again, have more than 7 cards, and then we'll give you another cleanup step, and you will be able to chain those together until you find the card that you're looking for. And you can be holding land in your hand, for instance, to be able to cast things at instant speed by discarding those lands and creating mana. So it allows you to kind of very strategically and very precisely kind of mill through your deck until you find a certain thing, and then be able to cast it all on your end step just by having some number of cards more than 7. So in this particular list, the use of this apparatus is just trying to to use every way that we have for creating large draw situations. So we're doing Necropotence, and we're doing Adnaz and Peer into the Abyss, and the types of things that you would normally expect to draw you lots of cards. And because we're not, this isn't Corvold, where we're getting card advantage, just straight out of our command zone. We need to add some extra things to make sure that we can draw cards. We're never going to have any trouble with mana because of Kadama. If we can get Kadama onto the battlefield, then he produces so much value, and I think it probably makes sense to talk a little bit about what makes Kadama so explosive. So on the one hand, because you can put lands into play basically off of any permanent, the value of cards that are giving you lots of cards in hand goes way up. So, for instance, if you've got a Necropotence, and let's say you do a Necro for 30, and you've got Kadama in play, and you have some way of casting spells with Flash, or maybe you do a crop rotation and you put Emergent Zone onto the battlefield, and then now you can start casting spells, like you're in a main phase during your end step. You're generally going to have a bunch of lands in your hand. And a lot of times what you can do is you cast a Dork, that's going to trigger Kadama, put a land onto the battlefield. And then those lands come into play untapped, so you can tap them and get value out of them. And what you wind up doing is then you have value engines that you combine those things with, like Valakut Exploration or Cloudstone Curio, to be able to either draw more cards off of those lands, or return lands back to your hand, then put lands back onto the battlefield again, and it snowballs very quickly with the amount of mana that you're able to generate. Another aspect that Kadama also gives you is that it's something I kind of call it combo hiding, because you can take something that is maybe innocuous looking, like maybe you cast Vial Smasher, and you've got Necropotence in hand or Cloudstone Curio in hand. People might not try to interact with Vial Smasher and let that resolve, and then when Vial Smasher enters the battlefield, you can put anything you want onto the battlefield, and it's a trigger, so there's no way for people to interact with it on the stack, and most of the time it's going to come onto the battlefield. So you can do some really tricky things to kind of sneak board state very emergently without people being prepared for it. Fetchlands become really, really good too, because they, let's say that you play your land for turn, and you've got, let's say you have 3 Fetchlands in your hand. So you play a land for turn, Kadama sees that land, so then you're allowed to put another land onto the battlefield. So you put that Fetchland onto the battlefield. Then you can crack that, which then puts another land onto the battlefield. Kadama sees that, and you can put another fetch land onto the battlefield. And you can kind of arbitrarily string them along as long as you have more things in your hand that you can just kind of put into play. So it's extremely explosive, and there's just a lot of really cool lines that you can use to kind of exploit those things that Kadama's going to do. So back to Bone Miser, one of the things there that most people don't use if they're going to use Bone Miser is the fact that it creates zombie tokens. And you look at that and you say, most of the time people just kind of don't care. It's like, well, I really care about the draw and I care about the mana. The zombie tokens coming onto the battlefield can put lands into play from your hand. So this is just another kind of layer of value that you get to add if you're in a situation where you've got Kadama in play. So there's some really kind of clever things that you can do. And every time I pilot it, I kind of discover stuff that I didn't consider, like when I was putting the deck together. I was like, whoa, that's surprising and really cool. And I think a lot of other people find that with Kadama as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And every time I see somebody do something new with this card, I'm always intrigued, because it's just such a there's so many different things that you can do with it. But, so we've heard a little bit about what the combo lines are from Cobblepott. And, there's lots of things that you can do here. Fenix, you're kind of on a similar game plan. Not nearly as, it's not the shadow bag, but you're also doing an ad nos. I believe you're also playing Emergent Zone and doing some of that not end step silliness that, you Jund players like to do.
Yeah.
So kind of walk me through what's going on with some of this stuff.
Yeah. So just even at this point, highlighting differences from Cobble's list to my list, I think I'm the only one who isn't on Necropotence, which may be incorrect, but that's probably a debate for a little bit later.
I initially wasn't on Necropotence, and then I was like, wait a minute, Vial Smasher's a 3-drop, right?
Right.
And then I put Necropotence in my deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do actually have... so one big thing that Cobble didn't mention with Kodama is that after a Nas with Kodama out, for example, 2-mana Mana Rocks become mana neutral. And so my deck actually has more 2-mana Mana Rocks in it than normally you would see in a Turbo Nas or farm deck. And then it lines up with the fact that the 2-mana Mana Rocks all line up with Grinding Station and Underworld Breach. And so I'm leaning a lot heavier on the Underworld Breach than either Cobble or Spleenface are. And so a lot of those combos, then you can Grinding Station and then start dumping cards from your hand with a Grinding Station out and start generating mana without actually having to have an LED in your graveyard or crack the LED.
Interesting. Man. Kodama just gives you so many weird interactions.
It's really tricky when you're piloting it. Keeping track of the triggers is really complex at first when you're first learning the deck, and it's one of those things where it's easy to to kind of short the value that Kadama is giving you because maybe you missed some of the triggers. Like if you've got Kadama and Lotus Cobra and Cloudstone out at the same time. Keeping track of all the stuff that's going on is a lot, and it's really powerful.
Are you trying to make MTGO crash because this is how we make MTGO crash?
Right, but once you get used to it, and you don't miss those triggers, it's really really cool, and you can do just a lot of really surprising things.
So Spleen with yours. Yours is obviously you're playing Nas, but you're playing the Snoop deck. So your lines and your interactions are going to be vastly different, right? So kind of walk me through what is going on here, and how do some of your combo lines really end up playing out? You kind of touched on it a little bit, where you're talking about getting Razaketh and then like a priest off the ETB trigger. So kind of explain in a little bit more depth here what some of your lines are and what they look like.
Yeah, so I was essentially trying to balance. I wanted to play combos that synergized very well with Kodama, but weren't sort of reliant on Kodama. Cobble and Fenix, they're playing some cards like that take advantage, for example, of like landfall things. Where then you sort of have to be like those cards I find don't work super well if you don't actually have Kodama in play. Whereas something like a Snoop combo, obviously it doesn't have the same like crazy synergy with Kodama, but it is legitimately a lot stronger when you have Kodama in play because there's a lot of really cheeky things you can do to cheat on mana costs and cheat on cards and protect things from counter spells and stuff like that. But you can still just sort of execute the generic combo even without Kodama. And the same is true with Razaketh, which is and then obviously we're all on some degree of breach lines, which all of those work without Kodama. But yeah, I wanted my sort of my not generic Nas Breach combos to synergize with Kodama but not be reliant on it, and I found Snoop was sort of a good midpoint on that. yeah, I also, I mentioned playing some things like the Priest of Gix and Urabrask. Those I was originally testing some very strange survival of the fittest based lines, and those were sort of part of that initially. They don't wind up being great, but you can still do some reasonably clever things if you have a few creatures in hand. For example, casting one priest and then finding the other priest and putting it in off the trigger is like a giant ritual. And then I'm playing Imperial Recruiter, which is obviously like a big thing for Snoop combos, but also with Kodama out, it is just another copy of Dockside, if that's what you want it to be.
Right.
And then
It might be worth just explaining why Imperial Recruiter
Yeah.
is so good if you do have Kadama out.
Yeah, so when you have Kodama out, essentially you can stack the trigger so that the Imperial Recruiter resolves first. So that, and then the Kodama trigger resolves. So as long as what you're getting has a CMC of 3 or less, Imperial Recruiter essentially just puts it directly into play rather than into your hand. So I think the only card in my deck that Imperial Recruiter can find that... Oh, no, there's 2. It can find Sling Gang Lieutenant, and it can find Kiki Jiki. But apart from that, if I want it to be a Dockside, it's a Dockside. If I want it to be... one of my Snoop pieces, it's one of the... Like, if I want it to be the Snoop itself, it's the Snoop or the Goblin Recruiter.
I just got to tell you before you even go on, it's I believe you have made Amy's new favorite deck. Like, I feel like once she listens to this and looks at this list, she's gonna flip out.
All right, well, that's a lot of pressure, but hopefully I did good. Yeah, no reps or warranties. This is still very experimental. But yeah, and then my breach combo line that I went with is the Stitcher's Supplier Culling the Weak line, which I wanted to play Culling the Weak anyways, because I mean, playing Culling the Weak is really good, and also it, just slamming a super early Kodama, and then like if you play turn 1 Dork, turn 2 you can Culling the Weak and play Kodama, and then like you're untapping on turn 3 and just having a party. So I was on Culling anyways, and then the Stitcher Supplier, it lets you turn top deck tutors into Entombs, because again we are on Razaketh, but generally you just play it and then you sacrifice it to Culling the Weak or Diabolic Intent or something like that, and repeatedly doing that fuels, like it's if you cast Culling the Weak and Stitcher Supplier off a breach, you have to exile 6 cards, but you also mill 6 cards, and you net 2 black mana each time. So for exiling 6 cards from your library, you make 2 black mana, which wins the game pretty effectively. Assuming you have at least 1 extra card in your graveyard. You don't have to exile your entire deck, but yeah. So that was sort of my concession to trying to enable the breach lines. Also, on the survival of the fittest note, yes, we don't have Hull Breacher in this deck, but I was playing just like regular Razakats the other day, and oh my god, in a deck that has both Hull Breacher and Opposition Agent, just playing survival and passing the turn is insanely powerful. It's insanely powerful.
Triggered.
Like, cast a wheel or a tutor. I dare you.
Right.
Like, even just holding up the mana essentially means your opponents can't cast wheels or tutors, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, I think I've covered sort of what makes my
for sure
my list different from everyone else.
So there's a lot of different win cons. Obviously, we've got Snoop, we've got all these different things. Cobble, how is your game how is your deck closing out the game?
Okay. So for my list, I don't run any cards that are devoted win cons. And what I mean by that is our win cons are either value pieces or, just cards that you would use for other purposes other than winning. So the win cons that I have are Finale of Devastation, Praetor's Grasp, Sun-Scorched Desert, and Valakut Exploration. So where we want to get in our game state most of the time is to get to a situation where you can combine Dockside Extortionist and Cloudstone Curio. And what that's going to do is that's going to generally give us a situation where we've got boundless mana, presuming we've got another creature that we can bounce and create a loop with the Cloudstone Curio and Dockside Extortionist. And then what we can do from there is either feed all of the mana into a Finale of Devastation to, give whatever number of creatures we have haste and make them infinitely large and swing with that. Praetor's Grasp is another where if we're doing a set of breach lines, then we can cast Praetor's Grasp multiple times from our graveyard. And generally what I'll do is, we're in Junt, but that doesn't mean that we can't cast Oracle and Consultation. So especially when we have access to Dockside and we can just make mana of any color. So that's a fine way to win as well. And Sun-Scorched Desert takes a little bit more effort to talk about. So in order to do that one, we actually need Kadama. So what'll happen is when we have Kadama and Cloudstone Curio, what happens is normally people look at Cloudstone Curio as a way to bounce creatures in kind of a cyclical fashion. They've got, 2 dorks, bounce, cast a dork, bring another dork back to hand, and go back and forth between the two of them. Cloudstone Curio triggers on all non-artifact permanent types, including lands. So if you've got Kadama in play, and you have a dork in hand and a land in hand, and you have a dork in play and a land in play, you can cast the dork, have it enter the battlefield. Now there's 2 triggers. There's a Kadama trigger that sees the dork enter, and there's the Cloudstone Curio that sees the dork come into play as well. So what you can do is you say, Kadama will let me put a land onto the battlefield, which is gonna trigger Cloudstone as well. And then the Cloudstone will bounce another dork to your hand. And then you let the Cloudstone bounce another land to your hand as well, and now you're back to where you started with a dork in hand and a land in hand. So you can keep on doing that. If one of the dorks you have isn't a dork but is a Dockside Extortionist, or if you've got a Lotus Cobra in play, or if you have Earthcraft, or if one of the lands is Gaia's Cradle,
or
there's a ton of different ways that you can go mana positive with it. And basically what'll happen is you only need, the lands that you're bouncing back and forth don't really matter. Once you draw into Sun-Scorched Desert, that's a land that will just ping an opponent whenever it comes into play. You just incorporate that into the cycle and kill all your opponents with a land entering the battlefield. Valakut Exploration is kind of similar to that. That one also is going to require Kadama, and that one also requires Cloudstone Curio to be able to be deterministic. So you're going to do the same kind of loop where you've got, dork, land, and Valakut Exploration will then allow you to just draw an arbitrary number of cards because you're going to have an arbitrary number of lands entering the battlefield. So you draw your deck, or you draw your deck into exile and then pass turn, and then Valakut Exploration is just going to hit all of your opponents for 70. So those are the ways that my particular list will finish a game. But the way that it gets into those scenarios we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. Fenix, you are also playing Valakut Exploration. What are you doing to win the game?
Yeah, so pretty much exactly what Cobble said. All of those are the exact same as my deck, except for I'm not playing the desert. and then I am actually playing Grinding Station. So to get into Grinding Station, specifically with Underworld Breach, it's pretty easy to assemble something along the lines of, say, Grinding Station, and then you play the LED. Playing the LED exiles 3 cards. You sacrifice the LED with Grinding Station to mill 3 cards, and then the LED is back in the graveyard. Repeat until you have no library or find the card that you're looking for. The card that you're looking for is usually Dockside Extortionist. Once you get the Dockside Extortionist, you can start milling your entire deck with Breach out, and so you can play any card that you're milling at that point. And other than that, the combos are all exactly like Cobble just went through, and so I don't really have too much to add there other than the Grinding Station itself.
Yeah. Spleen, so, you've got the Kiki Jiki combo, with Zealous Conscripts and Kiki Jiki. But, there's also some other things in here that are a little bit different. What is your deck doing specifically?
So to kill people, we're either doing a Kiki Snoop line that will kill eventually with Sling Gang Lieutenant, sacrificing an infinite number of conspicuous Snoops. And people have asked in the past, why is it that you play Sling Gang Lieutenant when Mog Fanatic is more versatile because it can target anything and it is 1 mana and not 4? The answer to that is that you can't, if you draw Mog Fanatic, there's no recovery for that. You can't play it and then use it as a win, whereas the Sling Gang you can just cast. And also it does have some synergies with Kodama as well, because it's a 4-drop that also makes 2 tokens, so you could put out 2 lands and a 4-drop or a 3-drop off of it. And then, attacking people with infinite conscripts. There's also a Mayhem Devil, which turns even most non-infinite Dockside lines into something approaching a win condition. If you have a Dockside making, say, 4 treasures and you're milling yourself or whatever and using Underworld Breach, you can reanimate it enough times to usually kill either everyone or at least most people. And then there's a few other ways you can set up very large numbers of Mayhem Devil triggers that aren't necessarily infinite. Although there are a few ways to go infinite, because we have Curio Dockside, and then also Curio Eternal Witness, which does let us recur every card in our deck as much as we want. And then obviously, as the others mentioned, we have the Praetor's Grasp, so we can take a Thassa's Oracle or something like that if we're feeling boring.
Right. One of the other things
Finale.
you got, and you've got Pyrite Spellbomb in there as well. What does that do for you?
So that's actually, you can use it as a win con. You could use any damaging spell as a win con with the Curio Eternal Witness lines. The reason we're playing Pyrite Spellbomb is, as I mentioned earlier, it provides a source of instant speed draw, which helps if you have instant speed draw, it turns your Goblin Recruiter into 1 red, win the game if you have Kodama out. But also, I don't like Hull Breacher or Opposition Agent. So it's largely there to kill those. Some people have used Seal of Fire in other decks. So this is basically the same thing as playing a Seal of Fire, except it's easier to cast. It is more mana to play and use, because you do need mana to use it. But it's easier to cast. You can often put the land out to use it when you cast it off a Kodama trigger. And then also you can use it to draw a card at instant speed, which has a few different uses in this deck. Unlike something like Seal of Fire, which you can't.
Interesting. It really is interesting. I really, really like these lists. They're really cool. So we've kind of explained some of the different combos. some of the different interactions, how you're getting through all of this. What are some of the key cards that really, set these things apart? Obviously, everybody's playing Ad Nos. I believe everybody except Fenix is playing Necropotence. Are you all playing?
Hey, Spleen, are you
I'm
playing
probably
Peer into the
wrong.
Abyss?
No, and you know what? I'm also not playing Behold the Beyond. Though actually, Kodama and Behold the Beyond might.
But outside of Morgan, everybody's pretty much on Peer into the Abyss, and Fenix is out there being a weirdo, not playing Necropotence. But Cobble, what are some of the key cards in the list that really kind of make things go for you?
So, beyond the obvious, the ad nos kind of effects, things that are value pieces in and of themselves that are also value pieces that are like accentuated when Kadama comes into play are the things that come to my mind here. So those would be Cloudstone Curio, Valakut Exploration, and Lotus Cobra. So Lotus Cobra on itself, when you play a fetch land, I mean, you don't have to have Kadama for Lotus Cobra to generate a whole lot of mana. So, you have a fetch land come into play, Lotus Cobra trigger, and then crack the fetch land to go put another land into play, trigger, and then, tap the land. That's 3 mana that you have just from one land. There's a lot of scenarios where you can, just have, a turn 1 or turn 2 Lotus Cobra that winds up giving you a whole lot more acceleration than I think that people would expect on its face. And when you have Lotus Cobra either with Kadama and you can string your fetches together, or you have Lotus Cobra and you combine it with Cloudstone Curio to bounce lands back to your hand, you can get into some really powerful kind of loops that let you do some pretty wild stuff. Valakut Exploration is one of those things that when it was spoiled, that's kind of cool. It's real good with Kadama just because of the fact that you can have sort of an unbounded amount of land drops. But even just having an early Valakut Exploration, before you've found your Nas or whatever, just getting an extra, 2 or 3 sometimes draws, quote unquote, per turn is, it's really good. I mean, you can compare that to Timna or compare that to Kraum or whatever, who are also getting you 2 or 3 extra draws per orbit. It's a really good rate, and I've been really, really happy every time I've seen it. And I think we've talked a whole lot about Cloudstone Curio, where it's it's a combo piece and it's a value engine. If you can find a dockside and find a Cloudstone, then you're never in a bad place. My particular list also, I would be remiss to say that Bone Miser wasn't something that, and I know that that's kind of a contentious thing because not everybody is into that card, but it's whenever it's in play, where I'm always happy to see it, just because this particular list, whether it is Nas kind of effects where you're giving yourself a huge grip that you're then gonna discard naturally at the end of your turn, or the wheel effects that we have access to, and then being able to capitalize on those with Underworld Breach, it fits really well into the plan. And I'm very happy with the way that it's situated in this particular list.
Yeah, it's a really cool card, and I've gotten to play some of your Shadow Bag lists over the past year or so, and I've been very impressed by that technology and specifically how Bone Miser works. I would encourage everyone to not second guess that card. It is a very good card. Fenix, when it comes to you, I know we got a lot of overlap here, but your kind of key cards, what are they going to be for you?
Yeah, so I get to go second, so Cobble just does all the talking for me, so I get to just skim over mine. So other than the 3 key cards that we have on our list here that I have for overlap with Lotus Cobra, Valakut, and the Cloudstone Curio, I do have Underworld Breach on mine, especially because I'm leaning a lot more into the farm style, replaying a bunch of creatures a lot of times. And just Underworld Breach kind of speaks for itself when it comes to everything that it does. The nice thing with Kodama is that my deck also has a bunch of kind of slightly hidden combos in it, where if you have certain combinations of cards, there are lines that are not very apparent with stuff like Phyrexian Tower or Eldritch Evolution, where you can use those as sack outlets to, when you're in the scenario like Spleenface was talking about, where you're replaying every card in your deck, you can put the creatures out, get them in the graveyard, put them back out, etc. Get them from your hand if you don't have if you have Kodama out, and sort of keep those loops going.
Yeah, it's very Kodama just opens up so many interesting interactions. I know I keep saying that, but it's like every time I keep thinking about a new thing that you could do or something else that you can do with it, I'm just like, oh yeah, I guess you can do that. Spleen, what are the key cards for your list?
So obviously the shared cards, Underworld Breach, Dockside, Cloudstone, Curio. But then I guess the biggest ones that I don't share with Fenix and Cobblepott would be Kiki Jiki, which is sort of the card that enables both the Snoop lines and just the standard Kiki Conscripts line, and then Razaketh, which just, Razaketh decks have existed for a very long time, and they've usually, depending on the exact iteration, they've had slightly different requirements, but it's usually something like, a mana and 2 creatures and a dozen and 12-ish life, and you win the game off Razaketh. And this one's pretty similar to that. The lines might vary. There are definitely some 0 mana lines. They might require a few more creatures, and there are low creature lines that might require a bit more mana. But the general idea hasn't changed much since people started messing around with that card.
Right. Yeah, it's been pretty consistent. Now everybody's got some spicy tech, some different things that everybody's playing on, and we have talked about the differences and those sort of things. Cobble, what is the land, kind of land situation? What is your tech that kind of sets yours apart outside of the shadow bag stuff?
So I'm running City of Traders, and this is, I think, a card that it's a great land because it's, you tap it for 2 mana, and it's one that I think that probably should see more play than it does, depending on, the shells that you're putting it in.
Yeah.
I think that
agree with that.
It's really good in lists that want to accelerate into higher mana commanders, so like Crown lists or Kadama lists or that kind of thing. But it's also good in lists that have either a large amount of artifact mana, so that you can it's sort of like a second Ancient Tomb, and being able to put an Arcane Signet or Felwar Stone or something like that onto the battlefield turn 1, and then continue going. It's a huge tempo increase. People are generally afraid of it because of the sack clause, but we can mitigate that here because the City of Traders trigger in this case is on playing a land, which is a specific game action. It's not on lands entering the battlefield. So you can, if you've got City of Traders and you've got Kadama in play, and you want to play a land, but you don't want to lose your City of Traders, you can, play a dork and trigger Kadama and let the land go into the battlefield off of the trigger. Then City of Traders will stay in play. So it's one of those ways that you can kind of, get around that and, get the advantage and not have any of the drawbacks that are there. Another tech piece that it's not really a tech piece for, like at, Turbo Nas Storm, you see this all the time, Rain of Filth. In this particular case, when your engine is running and you've got a Kadama in play and you've, resolved some sort of a big draw spell and you've got a big hand, I very routinely run into situations where I'll have fetches that don't have anything left to go and get, just because you play a land, put another land onto the battlefield, crack one of your fetches, put a land onto the battlefield, put another land onto the battlefield, and playing permanents, playing rocks. You play an LED, put a land onto the battlefield. You get into these situations where your fetches don't have anything to get, and the value of Rain of Filth. First of all, it goes up higher just because, I'm on turn 2 and I have 16 lands in play. That can happen, and being able to make use of those lands, even when they're quote unquote dead or whatever, is really good. I'm also running Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth for the same reason, so that the fetches can be swamps in the worst case, and that kind of compensates for those situations. That's a terrible place to be, where you've got so many lands in play that you can't fetch any more out of your deck. You're not hurting when you're there, but still being able to make use of those resources is important. So we're taking considerations to do that.
Yeah, and this was kind of an interesting, thing we were talking about before the show, is the City of Traders and all those things. And I think it is important to note those City of triggers, as any of our listeners who play any amount of Legacy would understand kind of how that works out, right?
Right.
And why that's really good. I agree, and I would be remiss if I did not take an opportunity within an episode to bring up that we do play City of Traders in Lavinia.
Goodness. One episode where you don't talk about Lavinia.
No, actually, I think we have to talk about this. Why? Your commander's 2 mana.
It's for knowledge
condition.
Pool.
Yeah, it's because
Costs 6 mana.
Yeah, it's because a lot of our big pieces cost a lot of mana. So
But-
it works out.
So you're just gonna play City of Traders as like your 5th or 6th land? I don't get it. I straight up don't get it.
It's basically Ancient Tomb number 2. But regardless,
But like really not.
you know what? It's been good enough. So
It also plays Armageddon, so
yeah, we do play Armageddon too. So like whatever. But anyway, not to get us off track, I apologize.
You started this.
Back onto CEDA.
I did. Shut up. God damn. So Fenix, you're playing a couple different cards here. That's kind of some of your specific technology that you're running. Why do I keep saying technology? Tech is what are your couple of kind of spicy includes?
Yeah, I'll deviate from my show notes a little bit here and include a couple of my specific includes. So the first one that I have here is Jiraga Tree Speaker. So specifically with the way that my deck is made, it's playing a lot more of the 2 mana rocks. And so the way the Jiraga Tree Speaker works, if you don't know, it has a level up for 1 and a green. It's a 1 mana creature that has a level up for 1 and a green. And then once it levels up once, it can tap for 2 green. So it's a 1 mana dork that can tap for 2 mana on turn 2. And so it's a little bit awkward in a lot of decks when you're trying to play turn 1 mana dork, turn 2 a 3-drop. But in my case, since I'm playing so many 2-drops, it lets me play a 1 mana dork that taps for 2 and get me farther ahead on turn 3 rather than farther ahead on turn 2.
Yeah, I feel like it's more like a 1 mana dork that can tap for 2 on turn 3.
Exactly, yeah. And so, like, if you're in a deck where you're trying to play a 3-drop on turn 2, like, say, Najeela, it's something that you wouldn't even look at. But since my deck has, I think I'm playing 3-4 extra 2-drop cards that I can pay for 2 colorless, it actually ends up being really good because it lets me play an extra card on turn 2 that I probably still would have played anyway, and then maybe had 1 mana floating, maybe 2 mana floating.
Wait, you mean you're not trying to turbo out Vial Smasher every game?
No.
Just for value.
And so that's really how that came in there. Another one that I have is Keen Sense, and so honestly, after listening to some arguments, I probably should be playing Mayhem Devil, because that would be a pretty spicy combination with Keen Sense in this deck. But so Keen Sense goes on the Vial Smasher, and it's a very decent, I'm out of gas, plan B, sit here and draw a couple cards as the turn cycle goes around. The next important card would be a Braid. So this deck definitely has, since I'm leaning so heavy into Underworld Breach, I definitely want something that answers both a Null Rod and a Collector Oof. And so a Braid hits both of those. It also hits, like Spleen was saying earlier, it hits the Hull Breacher, it hits the Opposition Agent. And then my final spicy card is Final Fortune. And so just because I'm playing so many 2-mana Mana Rocks, I'm not quite as likely to get a mana positive Adnaz. And so after I get an Adnaz off, I might be able to cast the Final Fortune after dumping a bunch of mana neutral or mana negative rocks, and then take my next turn with a bunch of mana and utilize all the cards I drew with my Naz.
I also noticed you're on 30 lands. Was that like a particularly deliberate thing, or was it just...
So I did actually include Prismatic Vista as an extra fetch, because when goldfishing, I found exactly what Cobble was talking about, with both missing fetches and then also with fetch chains where you can chain fetches together. So having just an extra fetch was worth it, in my opinion. And then also I do have Gemstone Caverns for a little bit extra early ramp. Although we can maybe make an argument about it not being necessary.
Spleen, yours is probably the most unique, as opposed to, it's very interesting, I gotta say, to be in an environment and in a deck building sort of situation where, Cobblepott does not have the most unique deck that we're working on.
Haha, I did it.
I love Cobble's list. Cobble's, I would say, is more obscure, but like as far as like the three of these go, like Cobble's and Fenix's really kind of feel very similar. Even though they got different angles, they're kind of hitting the same beats at. And yours is just, it almost feels like a different archetype.
Do we want to get straight into the deck list?
So yeah, I mean, we'll get there here. Those will be here in the descriptions. But Spleen, what is some of your kind of individual sort of tech pieces that really set yours apart?
Well, so I think I wound up covering most of it earlier, in mentions in a few different places. I think that like sort of my tech pieces that are interesting would be the priests, as already mentioned. The survival of the fittest, and then the pyrite spell bomb. But also, I do want to give sort of a passing mention to the reanimate effects, because like typically people see, you see animate dead and you go like, oh, you're gonna reanimate like Razaketh, or you're gonna reanimate, even something smaller, like maybe it's just a consecrated sphinx, or bigger, maybe it's a djinn. But particularly with Dockside and Breach, especially the cheaper reanimates, like literal reanimate and then unearth, and even the 2-mana enchantment ones, they can let you, if you have a way to get your Dockside Extortionist killed off, you can replay it and then get even more mana. They also let you do the Eternal Witness chains with Razaketh, or Dockside chains with Razaketh. And they just have a decent amount of utility. You can also, you can't unearth, but you can animate dead and reanimate other people's Docksides or Thassa's Oracles, or anything like that. Or even Opposition Agent, Hull Breacher, smaller things that maybe got killed or countered. So they definitely provide a decent amount of utility, and you can often use them for value, even though they seem sort of like dedicated quote unquote combo pieces.
Yeah. So, kind of getting into the deck lists here, just kind of as we're getting towards the end of all these things, Cobblepott, just kind of take us through your deck list here real quick and kind of give us a little bit of an overview of it now.
Sure. So it's going to have a lot of things that you expect to see in a Turbo Nas list. So there's going to be, your 16 artifacts, which are generally going to be the kind of the things that you expect. Obviously, you're going to have your Chrome Mox and your Lotus Petal and your Mana Crypt and Mox Diamond and Soul Ring and stuff like that. I think we've got enough artifacts here for Mox Opal and running Grim Monolith and Mana Vault, just because we want to be able to get to our Nazes, we want to get to our Peers, we want to be able to get into Kadama range as quickly as we can. So we're running all of the acceleration, and I don't think that there's really anything surprising there. I've got a weirdo piece as a scroll rack. That's one of those things that you see that in some Nas lists, and some people choose not to put them in there. I've always just been a big fan of it. Especially since we're on the Bone Miser plan, it kind of gives you a lot more specificity and being able to choose which cards you want to discard and when and that kind of thing. But Scroll Rack after a Nas is just gonna raise your Nas percentage by percentage points, because it lets you see that much more of your deck, just in case you didn't quite get all of the pieces that you need. And in this particular case, because we're not assembling anything that's quite as efficient and slim as Thassa's Oracle and Consult, we have a little bit more work to do to put our things together post Nas. So something like Scroll Rack, in my experience, has done a lot of work. Moving on to the creature suite, I've got some the main things that I'm running that nobody else is are Allosaurus Shepherd and Vexing Shusher, and those are on account of wanting to be able to protect our important pieces. Now, we don't have access to blue, and we only have kind of the minimal red counter suite that we have through Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, and Deflecting Swat. And when we do have Kadama in play, we're able to hide some of our combo pieces behind other things and let them kind of sneak in behind other permanents. But when we're wanting to cast something, when we're trying to cast Kadama himself, Allosaurus Shepherd and Vexing Shusher go a long way in making sure that Kadama's going to hit the table. And Vexing Shusher goes a long way in making sure that our Ad Naus actually does resolve when we want it to. I'm running Bloom Tender, and I feel like we're in 3-color, and Bloom Tender's kind of on point for what we want to do. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about why they didn't run Bloom Tender.
Yeah, so I was thinking, I was like, yes, the deck is actually, or at least my version of the deck is decently solidly in 3 colors, but if you look at the permanents, at least in my iteration, for me they're hugely disproportionately green, and unlike something like Thrasios and Tymna, where you play Bloom Tender and then you play Tymna and then your Bloom Tender taps for 3, sort of playing Vial Smasher is not particularly rewarding in my experience. So that was how I was going to make Bloom Tender into a really good dork a lot of the time, was what I found.
That's fair. I mean, I think that...
Yeah, Spleen nailed it on the head with me as well, where I'm not really on an early Vial Smasher plan, and that's going to be my majority of the time my colors.
Okay. I feel like, I don't know if we just see a disproportionate number of Deathrite Shamans and Vexing Shushers or that kind of thing, but most of the time, I'm pretty happy to see Bloom Tender, even when it's only 2 mana instead of 3. Moving on to enchantments, like I had said before, Yeah, I've got Oblivion Crown. That's just, part of that Bone Miser synergy there to be able to deterministically discard cards. Earthcraft. I'm surprised that I'm the only one who's on Earthcraft, just given the number of dorks that we're all on, and actually a number of creatures. It's really, really powerful. In my particular case, if you do have Bone Miser going, then the zombies that are coming into play can be tapped to generate mana off of the Earthcraft. And Earthcraft just with Cloudstone allows you to go mana positive just with, dorks and a little bit of extra stuff. Does anybody want to talk about Earthcraft?
I can, but Phoenix, if you have something you want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so my argument for not running Earthcraft, at least in mine, was most of my creatures ended up already being mana dorks. It does give them a pseudo haste, but I was struggling with finding basics. And I do have the Prismatic Vista, which specifically gets basics, but I was actually running into games where I'd never had a basic. I considered running Earthcraft, at least.
I think given that I have Earthcraft, I prioritize looking up basics. If I am in just if anything, just going and getting a snow-covered forest a lot of times is just because I'm expecting Earthcraft eventually to come down.
Yeah, I've definitely. So I've played Earthcraft in Hullen, obviously. When I was playing a Tainted Pact mana base in Thrasios Nadir, I did actually find that it was putting a pretty high amount of pressure on my mana base to try and consistently have that basic. Admittedly, I was trying to cast Thrasios most games, which certainly doesn't help, right? Because then you don't want to fetch a forest on turn 1 to play your dork, and then play Thrasios on turn 2, because then you're holding up green, which is not good. But I had issues in the past playing Earthcraft with a Tainted Pact mana base. A huge amount of my creatures are already tapping for mana, or are it would be sort of an awkward curve. Like if I'm playing a dork on turn 1, then I'm sort of taking a turn off to play Earthcraft. And then I play, say, Imperial Recruiter, and then, sure, it taps for mana, but I could have just played the Imperial Recruiter on turn 2 off the dork. And the things that I have really high requirements for in terms of colors are, it's usually red, with the Kiki and the Snoop combos. The deck is looking for ways to make red very often, and fetching mountains is a bad time as a general rule in 3-color decks, like basic mountains.
Right. For sure.
You never want to be forced to fetch a mountain. And obviously the synergy is pretty insane with things like Kodama and things like, I mean, I'm not playing Bone Miser, but I can imagine.
Sure.
But I personally found that if I was doing Kodama shenanigans, I very rarely sort of ran out of, if I wound up casting 2 creatures and putting 2 creatures in for free off of Kodama, for example, in a given turn, I already wasn't running out of mana.
That's valid.
Was just sort of what I found. So
in this case,
it felt a little bit. I mean, win more isn't exactly the right word, but similar.
Right.
It was a little bit. It was at its best when I was already doing really well on mana.
In my case, the Earthcraft is actually, it's got a stronger synergy with Cloudstone Curio than it does with Kadama, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So
the next part
here,
as you're kind of looking at the instance, everybody's kind of playing these, Abrupt Decay, Adnaz, Assassin's Trophy, Noxus Revival, Reign of Filth, REB. Everybody's playing Tainted Pact, kind of the usual suspects here. but you're also playing Cabal Ritual, Mausoleum Secrets, and Shadow of the Grave, which we've kind of talked Shadow of the Grave. What's up with Mausoleum Secrets here, Colin?
So Mausoleum Secrets is another kind of piece that I've got enough creatures in the list that most of the time Mausoleum Secrets is going to be able to go and get, in the worst case, like a specific removal if there's something that we need, but a lot of times it'll go and find Rain of Filth or Dark Ritual or Cabal Ritual to be able to power out a Naz. Most of the time, Mausoleum Secrets comes into play when we're doing some of our Bone Miser stuff. And so what'll happen is you've got Bone Miser in play, and you discard you discard a card, draw a card, discard a card, draw a card, discard a card, draw a card, discard a card, draw a card. And, you get to this point where you've got maybe, 2 or 3 cards left in your hand, and you've discarded maybe, 30 cards. And then you're looking for Shadow of the Grave to be able to go and then return all of the cards that you've discarded to your hand. Mausoleum Secrets is just a really good card at doing that, because most of the time you've discarded a couple of creature cards and you've got boundless black mana at that point. So you just cast Mausoleum Secrets, go get Shadow of the Grave, cast Shadow of the Grave, put all those cards back into your hand, and it's again sort of like a scroll rack kind of a thing where you've spent 2 mana and then you put 30 cards into your hand, and because you still have Bone Miser in play, then you can discard those cards and then turn them into more cards, more mana, and more advantage. So that's really the purpose for Mausoleum Secrets.
Right. Fenix, you're playing Reap, which is a big departure from everybody else. What's up with Reap in your list?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has played Reap, but
Reap was
nasty.
actually in my list for up until one of the last few edits.
Yeah, Reap, especially I've played a lot of Curious Control, so a lot of my card choices with Vial Smasher are informed from playing Curious Control. And so Reap is one of the best cards in Curious Control about just reusing cards. And it's an instant speed, maybe even better than Regrowth, that lets you trigger Vial Smasher, get the cards back that you maybe want to tutor with, or if you wanted to reuse. And then you can kind of loop that in with some of the other return to hand cards, or maybe an Underworld.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I mean, it's a really good value card anyway, too, right? Like, I mean, it's just, I feel like it doesn't see as much.
Right coming out.
Right. I feel like it doesn't see as much play as it used to, but it's still a solid card.
It was certainly it was at its best when everyone was playing Tymna, and there were always Tymnas in play. And then, one person plays like a Confidant or a Deathrite Shaman, and then you get an instant speed double regrowth.
Right.
Which was pretty good.
And you're on Entomb Spleen, and that, I'm assuming, is part of the, Razaketh and some of that lines.
Well, yes, you see, because in order to return Razaketh from your graveyard to play, he has to be in your graveyard.
So,
but it also, I mean...
You mean you don't hard cast it and then reanimate it when somebody kills it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's the real big baller brand way of
If there
doing
is any
that.
deck that could hard cast Razaketh.
Well, no, because we can't play
this one.
Smothering Tithe. That's what Smothering Tithe does in Razakats. It's like, oh no, I have a tutor and a fatty, and there's no way for my tutor to discard the fatty and also get a reanimate. Well, I guess I'll just get Smothering Tithe and then slam the fatty next turn.
Right.
But anyways, asides about cats aside. Yeah, obviously you're usually entombing Razaketh or potentially conscripts or Kiki to enable that combo. But you can also occasionally entomb a breach combo piece.
Okay.
It's extra cards but less mana than Demonic Tutor when you're doing breach combos, because you have to cast whatever you get out of your graveyard, which means you have to pay the escape cost, but it is 1 mana. So yeah, it's there for reasonably obvious reasons.
Right.
And I also stealthily edited out the lightning bolt that I was playing until 10 minutes ago. Those are my unique
looking at
instants.
I still stand by that the best time to be able to play Lightning Bolt in CDH was when Paradox Engine was legal, and you could imprint Lightning Bolt
Isochron Scepter.
Under an Isochron Scepter, and then just deal infinite damage. Those were the days. Cobble, moving on over to the sorcery suites, we're looking at, everybody's playing Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent, Finale of Devastation, Gamble, Imp Seal, Jessica's Will, Praetor's Grasp, Wheel of Fortune. And believe it or not, Cobble doesn't have any, cards that nobody else is really playing.
Right. I'm surprised as you are.
Yeah. But Fenix is playing 2 cards that really kind of deviate a little bit away from everybody else. You're playing Eldritch Evolution and Yog's Will, and so what is kind of your considerations with going into those?
Yeah, so Yog's Will is kind of a consideration with the fact that I am playing Grinding Station. And so I don't know if anybody's ever milled their entire graveyard with Grinding Station, but it's not too hard when you play Dockside Extortionist, something along those lines. And so if you have a Yogg Will in hand, it'll double as a second Breach. Not quite as good as Breach with comboing, but it's just kind of... This is definitely a deck that could value Yogg's Will and take advantage of it. And then I'll kind of let Spleen maybe talk about Eldritch Evolution and why that isn't in your deck at the moment. But
it's not in my deck because I'm dumb.
But it's just doubles as a creature tutor. It's doubles as a sacrifice outlet and lets me replay cards with Breach. It's just overall very good card.
I would normally be on Eldritch Evolution for what it's worth, but in my particular list, all of my creatures are either 1 or 2 CMC with the exception of Bone Miser. So...
but you can turn your Vial Smasher into a Bone Miser.
Yeah, but I have to cast my Vial Smasher, and
yes, that is fair.
But so it was considered, but I chose not to, and just wanted to go more for the Turbo Nas instead.
Yeah, it's not in my list because I was busy, and so I didn't have a lot of time. And then I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that's something that should have gone in, especially because I can turn Vial into either half of the Kiki combo, or I can turn Kodama into Razaketh. So that shouldn't only be in Phoenix's list, but
that's fine. I
live with.
I totally spaced on Mayhem Devil, so.
My two unique sorceries, which again will probably not surprise anyone, are Life, Death, and Unearth. I'm a little bit surprised that no one else was on Unearth, especially with, the Dockside shenanigans, and even, things like Tinderwall and just getting things back to get Kodama triggers and stuff like that, Eternal Witness, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But Life, Death is obviously just a Razaketh piece. It's a reanimate. It's not a super well costed reanimate, which is why you don't see it outside of dedicated reanimator decks. And then the life half of it forms the basis of your low creature Razaketh combos, because if you have 1 mana and a creature, you sacrifice the creature, you get Life, Death, you cast Life, you turn all your lands into creatures, and then that gets you 3 or 4 tutors off of Razaketh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, and we also, one thing that I do think is kind of interesting to talk about, we talked about Cobblepott's mana base because it was a little bit of a departure overall. But one thing that I do think is interesting as we're looking here is, Phoenix, you're playing Phyrexian Tower. You are playing Gemstone Caverns, and I do want you to touch on that because you are the only one playing Gemstone Caverns.
Yeah, so Gemstone Caverns, if you're not going first, lets you get an extra... It's another Mox Opal. And really in this deck, I found that trying to accelerate as fast as possible is definitely the game plan, and so that's why I decided to be on Gemstone Caverns. It is card disadvantage, but it is speed. And this deck does have a couple ways to refill with Wheel of Misfortune and Wheel of Fortune, at least in mine. and so that card disadvantage is not quite as pronounced.
And then, Spleen, one thing that I thought was really interesting with yours, because everybody's playing a Tainted Pact mana base, but you are playing 3 extra basics. So you're playing, the full 3, only 2 snow-covered, a forest, and a swamp. But you're also playing a basic forest, a mountain, and a swamp. So what was the kind of thought process going into that?
The thought process going to that was that I was originally trying to include... I was looking at Earthcraft in the first draft of the list, and also potentially either Blood Moon or Magus, or potentially both. Those eventually wound up being cut, and I would probably optimize this mana base a little bit farther. Phyrexian Tower is definitely an appealing option. I'm not sure about it just because it can be a little awkward to sacrifice your creatures in Razaketh decks. But you're not always playing Razaketh, so it should probably be in there. And then, I could play, a Forbidden... Or, sorry, not a Forbidden Orchard, like a Undergrowth Stadium, or Luxury Suite was one that, I had in and took out. But I think if I wasn't going to put in Moons or Earthcraft, I would swap this mana base to be a little less basic heavy.
Right.
I would probably try to
that
get
makes sense to me.
Phyrexian Tower in mine as well, just because the creatures that I have are largely expendable.
I mean, I'll be honest. I think it's really interesting because as I'm looking at these lists, I'm looking at these compared to each other. It's very interesting to me that Cobble is not the one, especially with you being on Earthcraft, playing those extra regular basics to kind of help even that out. Where and I know you said you did have to you probably need to readjust the mana base on this Spleen, but it's very interesting to me to see that kind of distinction where you're on 3 snow-covered swamps, but not including any regular basics.
Right. And again, that's just, I know that I've got Earthcraft in there, so I'm going to, a lot of times intentionally just go and find a snow-covered forest at some point in there. And
well, and so explain this to me a little bit more, because I'm a very heavy Earthcraft denier. I don't like that card very much.
Sure.
And is this not a card that if you're going to be playing it, you kind of want to be playing a lot of basics regardless, right? Like again, it is very interesting to me because it feels like of all the decks at the table, you would be the one that wants Prismatic Vista more than Fenix does. And this is. Please don't take this as me like attacking you or anything. No. I'm just curious. I am like genuinely curious.
Right. So I can see it's there. There's a balance here. We want to have access to our colors. So one of the problems that you have in a 3-color plus list when you try to run your snow covered and your basic is you wind up in situations where you have starts where it's like, oh, this hand is keepable, but I've got a basic mountain. Or, this hand is keepable, but I've only got, my land is a basic, and it's not going to give me the flexibility to do the things that I want. And yes, you can still get in that situation when, you are just running the 3 basics as well. But it's what I'd rather do is, rather than running 6 basics and have a higher volume of situations where I've got bad opening hands because of it, I would rather instead have 3 basics and run the possibility of having an Earthcraft, but not immediately having a fetch to be able to make use of it. Because I could probably put Prismatic Vista in there, but I think Prismatic Vista is low value when you only have 3 basics.
Right.
So in this particular case, it's about making conscious choices about which lands that you're grabbing at what point in the game. And I think everybody who's played Kadama realizes just how much of a source of value he confers, especially with lands, that I've never been in a situation where it was like, well, I've got Earthcraft and I'm just going to have to sit and wait. You wind up finding your fetches very, very quickly and converting those fetches. And it doesn't take a lot of work to be intentional and say, okay, this fetch is going to be a forest. And then now I'm going to use that for some other things, or this fetch is going to be a swamp. And that's another thing too. You can also, because I'm running Urborg, you can have your forest also be a swamp and you don't have to choose. So,
right.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that Cobble's land base, as it's currently constructed, you have 4 colorless lands.
Yes.
Which means once you take out, I assume you're running 9 fetches.
Yeah.
That means setting aside the fetches, 20% of your lands don't tap for colored mana. So I certainly see why then saying a further 25% of your lands only tap for 1 color.
Exactly.
Like now we're looking at 50% of our mana base almost that's only making 0 or 1 color, and that gets awkward pretty quickly.
Right. And so Urborg
Well, I
helps
think
with
this
the
is-
colorless lands too, in the case of
Right.
Yeah. But just like, especially with openers, right, where you don't necessarily have a clear path to getting Urborg.
that's right.
You have 4 colorless lands. You have Gaia's Cradle, which is often awkward early.
Yes.
And then, it's like, oh, I have to, I have like Gaia's Cradle and I have to fetch a forest to play my creature. And so I see why you didn't go up to like 5 or 6 basics for sure.
Exactly.
Right. No, I mean, that makes sense. And this is going to be very interesting because especially as we get closer to call time, we've got some specific content coming out for you guys. Podcast episode where we're going to have Cobblepott, Pongo, and I sitting down, and we're going to really dive into this deck building stuff. And one of the things I'm really going to push you guys on is specifically how the hell do you make a mana base? Because that's I feel like as somebody when it's making a mana base is, in my opinion, one of the hardest parts of creating a deck.
Sure.
Is balancing your mana base well. And that's something that, I think a lot of people will be really excited to hear from you guys about.
It's funny. I don't actually think it's a hugely difficult skill. I think it's just one that's very hard to learn because it's like,
right.
You build like an okay, the difference between an okay mana base and like a great mana base is like really marginal, and there's a lot of it's a very small percentage of hands where if you'd built your mana base better, you'd actually be fine. And it's hard to differentiate. Is it just, oh, I didn't draw the right lands? Or is it, oh, I didn't put the right lands in my deck?
Right.
And most of the time, it's probably just that you didn't draw the right lands. You run 3 colorless lands. You draw 2 of them in an opener. Like, I mean, okay, that's a super unlikely event. That's probably not a huge deck building error. So then you're looking at really only a very narrow slice of your games are things that you can actually use to effectively evaluate your mana base, because most of the time it's either fine or the small tweaks wouldn't have made a difference.
Right.
And you have to take into account things like, the density of artifact mana that you have. And so, like, for instance, if you're, running 16 rocks, then that will forgive some amount of colorless only lands. Being able to then, if you have an opener that has, a colorless only land, but that colorless only land will let you get a signet into play, then it'll, you've got enough flexibility there to still be able to cast the spells that you want to be able to cast, even though, on its face, it would look like you might not have the flexibility.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was mentioning this even before we had this episode, is it's harder to build lower color mana bases in CDH. It's harder to build a 2 and 3 color mana base than it is to build a 4 and 5 color mana base, because with all fetches and all duels, it's really easy to make perfect mana.
Very much so.
And just the number of rainbow lands.
Right. Well, it's very interesting. I'm really excited to see these decks, and we're going to feature some of them in gameplay. And I'm sure on where we stream and with Team Turn 3, you will get the opportunity to, at the very least, see Morgan pilot this.
Wait, what?
I would assume at some point.
Did I agree to that? Oh, no.
I'm assuming you're going to want to play it at some point.
Yeah, he wants to show it off, right?
Do I? No. Okay.
You'll get to at least see Cobbles at some point on our channel for
I'm
sure.
Spleenface, and I do not approve this message.
We go through all of this to talk about these decks and why they're cool and all of this, and you're over here like, I don't know that I'm going to play it.
I'll play mine.
I mean,
I'll play
I'm
mine.
probably not. I build a lot of decks that I don't wind up playing.
That's fair.
How else do you think I got to like 350 decks on Tapped Out?
What's tapped out?
That's a good point.
What's
you know,
Tapped Out?
it's
What is this,
who uses that
2015?
Right.
But one thing that we're going to be doing here, speaking of these brewer choice, this is going to be a continuing type of episode with the podcast that we're going to do, kind of frequently, just to kind of flex the brain muscles a little bit, work them out a little bit. But, one thing that we're doing, just to kind of put this into some people's ears, and into your heads as we go forward, is the fact that we're going to be doing a deck list challenge here coming up in the month of February and in March. And what that challenge is we're all tasked with taking an iconic deck from Magic's history. So something like, the thing that comes to mind immediately for me is like Jund or Burn or, throw some Death and Taxes, all these show and tell, all these different things. And so we're all doing those lists, and how much have you guys got to work on those a whole lot yet? I know Fenix has been working on it a little bit, but I've been working on mine a lot. I love it.
Yeah, I'm well along with mine. It's not complete yet, but it's the process of taking like a legacy list or a modern list and then casting it into a 100 card singleton format and trying to make it CADH viable. That you can't always remain faithful exactly to what the list was about, especially when you're coming from formats that wanted to play four ofs various cards.
Right.
So there's I think the kind of the creativity of each of the people, using some license to take the idea and wanting to kind of like run with the spirit of the deck and make the types of changes that seem like they fit with that spirit. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that comes off, and I'll be excited to play mine for sure.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I've already played mine a few times. I've been very open and very, I've kind of been showing people this Golos prison list that I've been working on, and originally started off as I was going to build Tron with like some prison, some Mishra's Workshop elements into it, and then it just kind of went, what if I just lean all the way into the workshops side of it? And so here I am. Really liking this deck. It's a lot of fun. Not for everybody else that has to play against it, but it's fun for me. Spleen, were you
I
playing?
had fun playing against it most of the time because most of the time it just did nothing.
Wham!
But there was that one game. I'm still largely just brooding that you won't let me play Yorion, but
You can play Yorion in your 99 if you want, but
I want to play
you
it
can't.
as a companion.
Well, unfortunately,
It's so
it doesn't
appropriate
function.
for the deck, but no.
I understand, but you got to be able to fit it into what we're doing. If you were trying to do prime time, you'd have to figure out how to do the Primeval Titan deck thing without prime time. But I'm really excited for this. We've got a lot of great brewers and a lot of great, content creators lined up to, be doing this with us. And it's just going to be such a blast. I'm so excited for this.
Maybe I can campaign to have Sheldon change the rules so that your deck just has to be at least 100 cards.
I'm sure he'll be on board with that.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised it's not allowed to be more than 100 cards.
I am too, honestly. I think that's odd, but that's a whole conversation we could get into.
I mean, you're allowed to play
with that
Battle
being
of Wits
said,
in your deck, even with 100 cards.
That's true. You are allowed to. Unfortunately, though, that it will never win you the game.
It's not going to win you the game.
The other
any
side
way.
of that is, well, fair. But with that being said, again, thank you all to everyone who stopped in and wanted to listen to us talk about these deck lists for an hour and a half. But again, just a reminder, if you're watching on or listening on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're not, make sure to check out our Patreon. Well, even if you are on YouTube, make sure to check out our Patreon. We've got a couple different tiers down there. And so what our tiers look like is we've got the Sentinel tier, where that's just $1 a month. You'd go drop in there. You give us, you're just trying to help us out. If you want to also do that and get access to our Discord server, you would be part of the Cunning Castaways, what we're calling it at this moment, for $2 a month. $5 a month are the Prodigies of Vryn. You guys get access to the Discord, and you get your name in the credits. And the Strategist, which is our top tier, is you get to, moving forward, you're going to kind of be able to help us form some of the series. You're going to be able to help request decks that you'd like to see Cobble and the crew work on in Brewer's Choice episodes, and kind of help just those sorts of things. And you really help us out a ton, and we'll give you those patron shout outs in the credits and all those sorts of things as well. But we appreciate all of you. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I started this channel at the beginning of, really at the end of October, beginning of November, and never in my wildest dreams would it have done as well as it has in the first 2 to 3 months. And just being able to be on this ride with the people that I've gotten to meet, and all the, we have 18 patrons right now. And that's just so cool to me that there are 18 people out there. I know it doesn't seem like a lot to everybody, but I mean, to me, the fact that there's 18 people who like what we do enough to support it is so cool. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you enough, and appreciate everybody who's in this, doing this podcast and in this with me right now. So I appreciate all of you. I'm glad that you're around. Thank you for listening. And we're going to come back next week. Like I said, next week it's going to be Cobble, Pongo, and I. We're going to be talking about some deck building. So with that, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.